I'd say we're off. When we talked on Sunday, said that when Christ died and rose again, he defeated an enemy, freeing us then to obey him and him alone. Because what had happened is Satan had always had this trump card. It was this card that read condemnation and pointed right to us. But when Christ came, everything changed because he dealt this death blow to Satan. And then now that he was defeated, no longer did we have these rules and regulations hanging over us because Christ canceled this record of debt. But Satan then tries to deceive believers and bring them back into this condemnation, into these rules and regulations of the world. And every era, it kind of has their own flavor of what this looks like. The devil sends kind of these salesmen that try to woo us back into these old ways. The sales pitches, they kind of always just sound the same. Like you call yourself a Christian and you fill in the blank. Or haven't you heard that Christians celebrate X, Y, and Z? Or you could even say something like, how could you possibly say you submit to Christ and yet you go there, wherever there is? Or even, what? You watch what and you read what? Don't you know that Christians, we can't even touch that stuff? But it turns out that these kind of alternative plans of righteousness, they're deadly. Because they do two things. One, they dethrone the Son of God by undoing his cross work and actually putting these elemental spirits on the throne. And number two, they actually stunt our growth as believers. And so what appears to be killing the flesh is actually advancing it, and advancing our pursuit of righteousness in no way whatsoever. So instead, what we saw is that when Christ died and rose, then he defeated this enemy and freed us to obey him and him alone. So now we don't live to the rules and regulations of the world, but to Christ. So here's maybe a few questions to try to dig deeper. How do we apply this to our lives? So here's question one. Why is it dangerous to submit to the rules and regulations of other people and not to Christ? Number two, what are some examples in your life of these kind of disputable matters that someone has made non-negotiable? Number three, how would you approach someone who you think is insisting upon a disputable matter as if it was non-negotiable? What would you say to them? Number four, we talked about the freedom that we have in Christ. I'm wondering, what are some examples where it might be wise for you to forego your freedom in Christ? And finally, number five, in preparation for next week, would you maybe think over what does it mean to walk in Christ, to live for him? This week we talked about what does it mean to get distracted. But next week we're going to talk more concretely about what does it mean to live out this identity. So what are some ways, what are some examples, what are some things that Christians ought to be doing as believers?